You
we're at
caught it
the
all.
50, we're at the 53-minute mark. Um, would you want to maybe give just one type of the blaming God objection?
Okay, yeah. So maybe it's not so much one type; it's kind of a classification of those objections, and it's going to be a bit of a bold claim on my side to say here's why they all fail in the same ways.
Sure, sure.
But then for the details, you can again consult my detailed work in the book. So I think that's the accusation here is to say that God is doing something inappropriate when He determines us to do something evil. You have I tend to put them in three categories. Like I say that the argument tends to be half baked, and I say that there's really three recipes to try to complete the baking. One of them is the foggy recipe, and then there's the ambitious, and then there's the timid. So the foggy recipe is simply to try to use the language about God being the author of sin. To say that if God determines what we do and that includes our sin, then He's the author of sin, and that's wrong. And the response to this foggy version is to say that we're not even sure which premise to refute here, because it's not altogether clear what is meant by author of sin. Are we saying that's something that God is inappropriately like, the author of sin, like he's doing something wrong, that he's evil himself, or that he's sinning himself? If that's what we mean by the phrase author of sin, then the Calvinist is going to say, well, look, I deny that God is the author of sin in that sense. And I don't see how that follows from determinism simply like that. So that doesn't really successfully refute the compatibilist view. On the other hand, if what is meant by author of sin is something a little bit milder, like God is determining what we do, then that's question begging. Right? So if just because He's determining, then it's evil. That's the very debated question. So when you clarify the foggy, you end up either begging the question or also making claims that might be self-refuting with the objector's own view. Right? So if you don't say, okay, it's the determinism, but it's something else, like in what way is God standing behind evil? The objector might make claims that it's wrong for God to do X, not realizing that his own model of God actually entails that God does that very thing. Because it's no longer determinism, right? So the fact that he rejects determinism doesn't keep him safe from his own objection, and they tend to make claims that might well be attacking their own view as well. So when you unpack the foggy recipe, you land with self-refuting or question begging, which is not a great fate on either end. And then that's when you try to clarify what it is. I think that's really those the ambitious and the timid. So the ambitious says God does not stand in evil does not stand behind evil in any way, right? And that's too ambitious, and that's what's self-refuting, because in some way or another, God stands behind evil, right? I mean, if you're a Christian and you affirm the various texts that I've read at the beginning of this interview, God is behind evil in those in one way, at least, even if not in a determinist way. So you can't flat out say He doesn't stand behind evil in any way. That would be too ambitious, and that ends up being self-refuting. On the other hand, the timid recipe, which says, okay, it's not that He doesn't stand behind evil in any way, but He doesn't stand behind evil in a deterministic way. That's your problem. That's your view's problem. But that's claim now doesn't stand behind evil in any way. That would be too ambitious, and that ends up being self-refuting. On the other hand, the timid recipe, which says, okay, it's not that He doesn't stand behind evil in any way, but He doesn't stand behind evil in a deterministic way. That's your problem. That's your view's problem. But that claim now becomes question begging, because again, the simple fact of determinism is not granted to entail that God is doing something wrong. That's the debated question at hand. So if you clarify in what way God stands behind evil, you tend to fall on each of those sides. Either you are self-refuting because you're affirming something that your own model of God entails, and so you shouldn't say it's wrong for God to do that, or you're simply focusing on what's indeed unique about my Calvinist view, but then it's question begging whether that in fact is a problem. So that's the big lines of my responses to those type of arguments, but there's lots of details about how one articulates each attempt and whether they fall in one camp or the other.